Hey everybody, this is Module 2, just kind of giving you some summary of what we talked about. Want to spend a little bit of time on classical thinking. Classical thinking is important. It gave us a lot of important rights. The Bill of Rights comes right out of the classical theory. This includes the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. It also involves the right to remain silent. It involves search warrants, freedom of speech, a number of things like that. At the same time, you need to keep in mind that it also assumes that everybody has free will, so that crimes are committed by people who freely choose. In other words, they weigh the pleasure and the punishment aspect. They determine which is a better way to go. I know this is true with a lot of young burglars that I've talked to over the years, is it's just like, hey, it's so easy to find like 25 houses where no one's home during the day, and you can just walk in and pick up whatever you want: televisions, stereo equipment, maybe even a cell phone or two, and a number of things that you can turn around and pawn, and what we call fence, and get money. And generally, the reason they do it is to buy drugs. But it becomes their occupation. So it's important to know that, yes, some of these things are true. But there's also a problem, and we'll talk more about this in later modules, about overgeneralizing. So not everybody fits in that category. So that's where this other alternative, the positivist theory, came in later on in the 19th century. Now, in the beginning, the positive theory was a joke. I mean, basically, what it was believing that if you have these certain knots on your head, or if you have a big nose, if you're just ugly, then you're evil. And therefore, if you're evil, then you're a criminal. And none of that was true, obviously. And you want to talk about overgeneralizing. And then, as time went on, though, what they thought was science, they soon learned wasn't science, and so they started to make progress with what we would call like some true science. And so in some of these things, they started looking more into parenting, environment, peer pressure, a number of different reasons. And one of the things I want to try to get across to some of you, that you take the attitude that sociology is trying to let people off or find excuses. And that's really not what is going on in my experience. I think what they're really trying to do is find out what works in terms of ways to steer young people away from a career as a criminal. For instance, truancy. We have figured out that a truant child tends to get in trouble. So kids ought to be in school. They need to be kept busy. Idle hands is the devil's workshop. So that's more what we're talking about with positive ideals. The other thing about it, too, is that if we can figure out what works in terms of activities, give kids things to do, what activities work, like Boys and Girls School, Job Corps if necessary, and also one of the big favorites is like Head Start and programs like that. So you start kids really young, where they may be generally abused or neglected, possibly, but you have them interacting with each other and with a teacher, maybe a nurse, school nurse, something like that, and that you can remove kids from abusive and neglectful kind of environments and try to get them into a better environment. Doesn't always work, but it does have some level of success. So, in other words, just try to prevent. The word is prevention. And so, positivist and later sociological theories are really driven by the need to prevent crime. Now, the classical school, on the other hand, they believe in deterrence. And, some of you, I've already told you that I don't believe in deterrence at all. I believe we often call something deterrence when it's really incapacitation. So, for example, some of you have been talking about the three strikes law. Well, for my part, I think that the three strikes law is really just incapacitation. They're on their third felony, and they've proven that they are a chronic criminal of some kind. And so basically, you have a homeless guy that has, I've seen homeless people with 50, 60 thefts. And a theft, even of a small thing, can be considered a felony. So we had a guy when I lived in Canton, Ohio. He was in the newspaper one week, in the Canton newspaper, because he just got convicted on his 50th felony for things like stealing, shoplifting, things like that. Well, then the Akron paper, which is only 20 miles away, realizes that the guy was splitting his time between Akron and Canton. So he had like 60 felonies in Akron. So this guy in two different jurisdictions in the state of Ohio had over 110 felonies. So some of these people they're just chronic because they don't work or they can't work, and they go out and they commit these crimes. I talked about burglaries in some of my comments, where I've seen a lot of young kids that I meet with that are performing lots of burglaries, 25 to 50 in a year. And so that's not good either. That is free will at work, but nobody's being deterred, obviously. The recidivism rate is so high for things like that nobody's being deterred. So, what was happening in some of these three strike states is a guy would get like three thefts, which are punishable by, let's say, around approximately 3 years maximum. And so by the time you're up to a dozen or so, you're definitely getting the 3 years. And so then they come to a point where they say, well, 3 years, that's not enough, the three strikes. So basically, it turns out to be life in prison plus 3 years. So that's almost an outrage. That's probably an Eighth Amendment problem. But everybody becomes so frustrated. The judges become frustrated. The prosecutor becomes frustrated. So the next thing you know, we'll find a deterrent. Well, what I'm trying to get across to you is there's another part of this. It's called incapacitation. And that's like, well, we're so sick and tired of working with this guy that we're just going to put him in cold storage, put him away for as long as we can. My bottom line on this is just a realism, which is this costs about, well, more than it costs to go to college, because you have guards watching over this guy constantly for the rest of his life. And I know some of you, well, it's life is not really life, but in some cases it is, especially when some of these guys are older. They've got a bad liver from drinking too much. And so 15 years is actually life in prison for some of these fellows. So just to get across to you what I'm trying is, they both have faults. They both have good points. But one thing I think is interesting is the aspect of the other social sciences like political science, economics. One of my degrees is in public administration. And these all have a part to play in criminal justice. But so does sociology. And criminal justice is a discipline that's born out of the other social sciences, not entirely sociology and not entirely political science. But I found that some people that want to operate on a more black and white system, then they tend to run at this from a political science perspective and just say, well, this is black and white, and so it's this is the law. It's black ink on white paper, and we'll just do this every time, and we won't discriminate. No bias, which is a fallacy. And the other part is that we will, have like harsh penalties that'll deter crime. Well, I just don't see it. It's just there's just way too much crime from people that have committed crimes before. Really, the criminal population is a shrinking population generally. In other words, crime is really going down as far as new criminals. But the problem is that the ones that are criminals have been criminals so long and so much that they just keep, doing the same thing over and over. They never learn. So what the positivists and following sociological theories will posit is that we need to look more at rehabilitation. Forget about deterrence, forget about incapacitation. It's just too expensive. Rehabilitation, we can send people to counseling, 3 or 4 different counts. We can get them their GED, get them into drug and alcohol counseling, get them into psychological, maybe counseling for their mental health issues, depression, things like that, and it's less expensive to put them through that while they're walking around with a device on their ankle. We call it ankle bracelet, or some people call it a Scram device, which is also able to determine if you've been drinking. Others can, test your sweat to find out if there is any kind of a drug in your system. And so there's a lot of different things that are worth trying in rehabilitation, and you're still saving a ton of money. What it helps you to do is try to boil down. We got these new, young first offenders. We put them into this rehabilitation, and we let them stay in the community, but they've got to wear that bracelet. And then the next thing you know, they've got their education, they've got some job skills, they learn how to build houses or weld or number of things. Cooking is one of the biggest things that I've seen. It's very popular in the prisons as far as classes that prisoners can sign up for. And so, those folks find a job, and a lot of times if they have their education, they find a job, they don't want to go back into crime, and they have very low rates of recidivism. So that's the whole difference between the two theories, classical and positivist. I hope that you understand that I'm not knocking either one. I'm saying they both have their pluses and they have their minuses. There's a lot of things in them that are kind of myths. And when we look at it, we've got to try to find what's really useful information in each, and then try to work at different cases using different theories. So if we see somebody that's highly violent, they need to be kept off the streets as long as possible, then let's go with the classical theory. Let's go with incapacitation. If we have somebody that has a drug problem or a chronic homelessness or something like that, then let's try to approach that from a more sociological point of view and use some positivist theories. And we'll study this a lot more as we go on in the future. Hey, best wishes to you. Hope you have a good week in Module 3. Always feel free to contact me, and take it easy. Bye.